we'll probably start in a bit, but we just gotta make sure our stream's working. But come come a little closer. Roll if you want. If not, that's fine. Okay. AJ, he's still checking the thing. Yeah, I guess to get just some introduction, my name's Camryn. I'm the director of events here at Startup Shell. And just for some background on why I chose to do this as my Shell talk, I've done film photography since my freshman year of high school. And a little bit before that, because my sister has done photography forever, and so I used to have to like help her do her projects, then I did them, and that's how I got involved into tech, because I started doing Photoshop, and then that led me towards doing game development, where now I combine my love for photography and film with game development, and yeah. Is it all good, AJ? Okay, so basically my talk today is photography principles of design, and then we'll cover the gear that Startup Shell is getting to be able to develop film here at Shell. So our agenda is first the history of different types of cameras and film, and then some kind of just like technical specs of different cameras, how that works, and as well as different parts of like darkroom and film development, and then kind of just good practices for design when shooting, and then how that affects our life day to day now. So firstly, the evolution of photography. I'm going to go through how we got to the cameras that we use today. This is one of the first photos that's like high definition. So I guess to kind of go over the big picture, the actual meaning of a camera is not like something that necessarily takes a photograph. It's basically, by definition, just a box with a hole that is getting light into it. The actual definition is a light-proof chamber, an aperture fitted with a lens, and a shutter. So the first version of this was called a camera obscura, and these are basically giant boxes with a tiny hole in them, and light is shown in from the outside world. And this is a fully dark box, and something to do with the science of all that makes it so that a reverse of that image is projected onto the inside of the box. And this was in the 5th century BCE, so a really long time ago. From that, there were pinhole cameras made, which was just like a smaller version of that. People started using them for portraiture, so this lady is sitting there, and they're using it to trace her image, so it made art a lot easier. Not a lot easier, but a little bit easier. And fast forward from that, in the 17th century, we got a portable version of the pinhole camera that basically could be carried around. And then, like, this is just a real version of someone doing this in their bedroom. You basically just block off all of the light from the windows and make a tiny little hole, and like it shows the real world in photographic form, which is really cool. You can do this with like a shoebox and paper, and it's really interesting. So the first permanent image that was actually taken with a camera obscura was by this French man, Niepce. I'm sorry to the French. But he basically used a portable pinhole camera and a plate that he covered with a bunch of weird stuff. He used like light-sensitive bitumen, which are just like active carbons, and he put it in some lavender oil, and then he put it in this box, and it was the first time that a permanent image was recorded. And as you can see, there was a lot of room for improvement. From there, we get the daguerreotype. That's roughly how you pronounce it, but it's also French, which is a fancier version of this, where a copper plate was coated with silver halides, which are just like active silver stuff. And then you put the plate in the back of the box, put it in the light, and you have to sit really still for like 15 minutes. And so they actually used it for memento moris, which are like these portraits of people once they were already dead, because they were the only people that weren't blurry from moving. Moving on from that, oh, they had to put them in these containers because they were still really sensitive to the chemicals of the air. After that, we got emulsion plates or wet plates, and these are basically same thing as before, except a bit more portable, and you didn't have to leave them in front of a person for like 15 minutes. It worked in like a minute or so, or seconds. But the bad part about these is that you had to bring all the chemicals with you to wherever you were going, and immediately after taking the picture, you had to start developing it and dumping chemicals all over it so that it wouldn't fade away. This was really popular in the Civil War because it was portable, and these guys would go around in wagons, which was pretty cool. And then from that, this was kind of like the best version of the actual plate method, which were gelatin plates. These also had silver halides on them, but you could burn the plate basically by exposing it to light, and then you didn't have to develop it with the chemicals right away. You basically just shoved it in a box, and you could do it when you were done all your photos at the end of the day or the week or whatever. And so from that, we got this, which is basically another version of the pinhole camera, but it actually used rolls of film. And so this guy, George Eastman, he basically made this box where it had film that went around, and it kind of was like a modern day disposable camera where you took all your images and then you drop your box off to get developed. And that later became Kodak as we know it today, which is super fun. That's kind of just some history. And then from there we got Polaroids and then DSLR, but it's not really what I'm focusing on. And at any point, if you guys have any questions, let me know. So moving on from that, this is the general, like, how cameras work and everything like that. So I'll use my handy camera here to kind of explain. So firstly, light goes in through this lens. There's a bunch of different types of lenses you can have, and goes into an aperture, which is basically what happens here. Can't really, it's hard to tell, but there's like basically just this window that closes like your eyeball depending on how much light you want to let in, and that hits a mirror, which hits your film, and there's a window that's a shutter also, and that goes really fast. From there, there's a lot of different stuff that we're going to kind of cover later on, but you have this that focuses your camera, and this closes and opens this little eyeball for aperture. This winds the film, and this clicks the photos. So there's a lot of different settings on here that you kind of get into depending on what type of film you use and the environment that you're shooting in, which we will talk about. But I guess first thing is to take note of what lens you're using. This one's like very standard, it's 35 millimeter, but you could also have like, I don't know what this one is by memory, different sizes depending on the environment that you're shooting. Like landscape has different longer lenses, and then there's like little tiny taking pictures of insects, and that has different lenses. You basically snap them on there and you figure that out, but I think most people just use like a standard one. But you can kind of see like in this how each different type of lens affects like the shape of their face. And so people say that 35 or 50 millimeter lens depth is closest to the human eye. So that's kind of like why people think that film makes you look more like people like say, oh, you took a photo of me and I look super weird. That's because it's taken with a digital camera that has a different focal length and it freaks you out. So some cameras you can match the length of your eye and then you're like, okay, I look normal in this. So that's 35 or 50, and then you can see this guy's face gets weird all types of ways. From there, you have your film speed, which is basically how sensitive the film is to light. This can kind of, most people just use 400, that's standard, but you can adjust that depending on if you want to shoot in like the middle of the sun or in the nighttime, and depending on how fast, like if you're shooting sports and stuff. From there, you have aperture, which is the first thing you want to consider. Aperture is how wide the eyeball hole of your camera is. Basically, the wider it is, the brighter your image will be, the smaller it is, the darker, but that also makes a greater depth of field, which is how far back in focus the photo you're taking will be, which I'll explain in a second. Depth of field, just literally how deep the focus is. So in this photo, you can see like this depth of field, the focus is very far back, but the forward objects are out of focus. That's because the depth of field is shallower or deeper. I don't know. It gets confusing. There's a lot of fractions involved. And then this one, like the front object is in focus and the back is blurry. And so that's just like a different example of how depth of field affects an image. And then shutter speed is something that's super interesting also. It's basically the amount of time that the little pinhole is open in your camera. So depending on that, if it's really bright out, you want to make it faster. And if it's really dark, you make it longer so that more light can get in. Yes?
Why do people refer to like aperture size as like fast and slow?
Aperture, well, shutter speed is fast and slow, but aperture is kind of like the, because it goes with the shutter speed. If you have a smaller aperture, you need to expose your photo for longer, otherwise, to make up for like how small the hole is, because it makes it darker. So basically, if you want a really high quality photo of something that goes really far back, you have to make the aperture really small, but because of that, it has to be open for a longer amount of time. Because of that, there's a lot more range of movement, and you have to have like a tripod or something like that for things like that. But if it's really bright outside and you have a pretty open aperture, you can take pictures of things and it'll be instant, and you can do that handheld. Something that is not handheld, like this, for example, is shot in a completely dark room. I'm tracing someone with a laser, and this is like something that I had the shutter open for minutes at a time, and I'm tracing this person's face, and I close it when it's done, and it only is picking up the light because that is what's burning into the film. And so this took me many attempts, so much to the point that I got 0 points on it because it was so late. But it's just something like really tricky that you can do with film. And so basically all these things together make your exposure for your photo. And so basically it's just like the aesthetic of your photo, and by adjusting different variables of those three things, you can make different effects, which I just have like an example here. It's like I wanted it to be a little bit blurry on the outside and like defined on the inside. And it's a very dark tunnel. It's in like the museums in DC. I don't know, like the art museums. And so like I had to change the aperture and the shutter speed because it was dark and it was moving because it's like on a treadmill. So just like things like that, getting it to shoot as you want it to is kind of difficult. And so from there you have your film. You've shot it, and now how do you develop it? That is kind of a whole process. Basically, you take it out of your camera and you have to put it in this big garbage-looking bag that has 2 layers, so you shove your hand in them. And one thing you really have to practice with this is being able to take the film off of it, the roll, and put it on this plastic-looking reel. So you have to practice this in the complete, you're basically blind because you're not looking at it, because any light that is getting on your film is going to affect what is happening to it. Any light that hits it is burnt from the outside. So all this you have to do in complete darkness. And so you practice loading already exposed film onto this reel until you're really good at it, and then you go into this dark bag and you redo it with your actual film. And so then it's loaded and you put it into this container, and the container with the lid has a hole on it that kind of makes sure that no light is getting into the container, but you can put water and crap in it. From here, your film is ready to be developed, and it's chemistry time, which is all the things you put on your film to make it stable. Okay, so when you take your pictures on your film, you have what's called a latent image, which is the image is there, but you can't actually see it at all. It's just like the little tiny crystals on the film being changed, but not enough that you can really use it. That's why we used Developer, which basically amplifies the difference between the exposed crystals, which are the ones that are burnt from the light, and the ones that aren't exposed and haven't really seen light. So you use Developer, which does this whole complicated process. I'm not going to get super into it, but it basically takes these crystals and makes the ones that are exposed, it washes, it like amplifies them basically. But over time, if you left this developer on it, it would make all of those crystals turn into like the activated ones. So you have to do it with a certain amount of time and a certain temperature that is specified by the developer that you use. So this is the fully developed latent image, but all of the other ones are still there. And if you put this film in the light still, it would still get all fucked up. Sorry, it would still get all messed up from the light. So from there, you have to use Fixer, and that makes it stable so that way no more light is affecting the chemistry of the film, and all of the crystals just stay as they are. That's pretty much it on this page. But yes, so basically from there, the rest of the image is flushed out. So all of these I got lost. All of those parts, when you put the fixer on it, are able to be washed out, and you're just left with the actual processed image, which is the negative, which is still not what you want for your photo. This is basically an inverse of the image that you want to create because it's just burning all of the very heavy light. So this is what a negative looks like. This is the negative, which is what you would get after developing the film. And then that's the actual image that you would get after scanning it or printing it in a dark room. Because basically when you have this image and you put a flashlight through it, what's shown on a paper is the inverse because of how the light is blocked. So you take your film that's fully developed now. If you mess it up, there's a lot of things you can mess up, but if you didn't mess it up, you go to the dark room, which I'm gonna briefly cover because we're not gonna have a dark room in Shell. We're just gonna have the ability to process your film and scan it digitally. But just for fun, it's a really spooky red room, completely dark. Lots of weird things would go on in there because you're in the dark as a high schooler. But there's ones in like DC and stuff you can go to, or people have their own at home. And it's a similar process, but you basically have this door that blocks all the light as you go in so that no light at any time is in there. You can only use those red lights because for some reason the waves of the red light aren't strong enough to burn or change any of the chemistry of the film or the paper that you're using. So you take this photographic paper, which is covered in some sort of halides that are basically acting the same as the ones previously. But you take your film, you put it in this sheet, and you burn it on the paper using this enlarger looking thing, which is a giant flashlight that burns the paper that's that's light sensitive. You can't bring the paper in there, otherwise it'll get all messed up. So you burn that in, and then you can see like, oh, I want this photo, I want that photo, and I want that photo. And so basically from there you cut that strip of film out of the roll that you have, and you put it in that section of the enlarger. From there, the light doesn't really know how to act with your film photo, so you have to test different amounts of time that you're burning the light through the film into the paper. So say you have this photo and you do what's called a test strip, and from there you do 5 seconds of light on the photo, and then you move you cover it completely except for one little sliver, and so you burn that for 5 seconds, and then you would start from this side. So, my mic. Sorry. Basically, like you start here. This is 5 seconds, and then you move and you burn it at 5 seconds. Then you move and you do another 5 seconds and another 5 seconds. So this one's burnt for 5, 10, 15, 20, 25. And then you can tell, which amount of light looks the best. And then you probably choose this one because it looks the least messed up. Or maybe that one. This one's really blurry, so we're going to ignore that. So from there, after you pick out your test strip slice, then you do a whole big image, which is where you basically use the entire sheet of paper for the amount of time that you decide is the best. From there, you basically do a similar process as you do with the film. The paper will still look completely white. It doesn't show up anything until you take this activated piece of paper and you put it in the developer, which does a lot of the crystal stuff again. But it's still really sensitive to the light, so you put it in stop bath, which makes the photos stop coming out of the white paper. And then from there, you put it in fixer, which means that like basically you can like rub it and it won't get all weird and everything like that. Because also, like, even if you have your black and white image that's in the stop bath, if you put it in the sun again, it'll like yellow over time. So that's what the fixer is for. And it looks like this. There are these 3 shallow tubs that you put your paper in, and you squeegee them and make sure that none of the chemicals get into other bins. Otherwise, you'll just have a circus on your hands. When it comes to like actually shooting photos, there's a lot of design principles that you could do a whole major on, but I'm just going to focus on the one that's cracked down the most in photography, which is the rule of thirds, which basically the rule of thirds is when you divide your image plane into 9 different squares, and the goal is that when you are shooting your image or your shot, you're putting your subject in one of these quadrants that are in the thirds, so like this third, this one, etc. And basically just compositionally, this is what like appeals the most to the human eye. I don't really know, it's just the common practice. So basically you align the subject with the intersections. This one here is this guy in the third on the right. In this one, you can also do it with linear elements, so like the ground of the landscape is pretty much aligned with the ground. And so, well, with the bottom third, you can basically, in most cameras, kind of, some of them have lines. You can put this on your phone, for example, and it'll do that for you, or you can just kind of have a feel for it through practice, because you can just see it. There's other ways to follow the rule of thirds, like diagonally. It really makes it more interesting, and your eyes follow it in a diagonal, but like the main point of focus still follows these points of emphasis. Like most rules, there are a lot of times or some special occasions that you should break the rule of thirds, and that is when there's a really strong sense of balance in the piece that you're shooting, or symmetry. When something is perfectly balanced, like if you're doing a portrait of someone and they're perfectly in the middle, then that can be a really cool point of emphasis that you don't really want to use the rule of thirds for. So those are just like things that, like this is where it's like kind of in the middle, but like the emphasis is still kind of in the thirds. So those are times when it's really cool to still break the rule of thirds. Other principles of design are, the main ones are balance, space, emphasis, movement, contrast, pattern and repetition, and unity and harmony. And I'm not going to go through all of these. You kind of get what they are, but if you are looking to get better at photography, using some of they all kind of go together and hand in hand. But looking into these, seeing artists and photographers that have used, like you can just look up like balance in photography, contrast in art, and then like see what comes up and see how you can incorporate that into your own stuff. It can be really interesting and make it a lot better, but that's a lot for me. And then modern day implications, basically a lot of different things. I think one of the most interesting for me is you can like read a lot about how photography has shaped medicine, because like in the olden days people had diagnoses, whatever, from books, but they just didn't really know what things looked like. That really shaped the medical field once they could actually photograph things. There's a lot of things in computer science for image processing and analysis. Gaming, marketing, history. One thing I'm working on a lot right now is photogrammetry, which is taking a bunch of photos of objects and making 3D models from them, so they can look at historical photos and piece together a model from what they have from the past, which is really interesting. Journalism, documentation, We have a lot of really cool film that's from the past, obviously, that are really, really cool. And then it's just affecting our culture, our art, and our fashion and things like that. Um, and then basically the equipment Shell is getting is all the stuff that I talked about over yonder. Basically, like, we're getting all the chemicals and the stuff to like load your own film onto this reel, this bag, and then all the chemicals to use with the sink, a timer, a temperature thing, and we were gonna have it here for the talk, but for some reason the building rejected the delivery. So I'm gonna have another one to like teach everyone how to actually develop and process the film to make it safe. And then we have a scanner that is high definition that you put your film through, and you can put it on your computer or your phone and make prints from there. Um, so yeah, that's pretty much all I have for you guys. I brought in all my cameras and stuff, and one thing I think one of them I think is cool is like there's like reloadable point. Like if you think this is really complicated, like you can get like this is a reloadable disposable, and so it's just a fun way to get into photography where you can just point and shoot, and you don't have to mess with the aperture or the shutter speed or things like that, and you can put different filters on it. Like this is for color, so Shell will only have black and white film development stuff for now because colored film development is a whole other process. It's more complicated, but we could look into that if people are really interested. So yeah, that's my little Shell talk on that. If anyone has questions, yeah. But thank you. Okay. Sure.
First, cool stuff. Second, if if I do develop my film like at home, what are your thoughts on, like having a very like big, scanner as opposed to having just a simple iPhone, then maybe like projecting the film into like a very like light surface
For printing or for just?
for scanning, yeah.
Oh, I mean, we just have a scanner that like makes a really high definition scan from your film, and you can make it as big as you want. But we don't have like, it doesn't project it anywhere. It's just like,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
So when you say like just scanning the film, right? Do you think a simple like iPhone camera would suffice, to scan this film?
Oh, I mean, they have scanners that connect to your iPhone camera, but it's not as quality. Like it would be fine for just like viewing images on your phone or for like probably printing out small. But if you're trying to make big prints, like we got a really high definition scanner, so you can probably make really big prints from there. Yes.
Does that mean when you scan it, if you like send it to your like laptop or something, you have to invert it?
With yes, I'm not sure if our scanner does it automatically or if you do that afterwards. But usually you scan it and then you invert it. Some of them do it automatically. And basically for film, I think I need to talk to like the people who are in charge of like the actual uh, operations of it all. But I was thinking like for shellers, like we would just allow them to use the film development materials whenever. But I was gonna hold kind of workshops where I can teach you guys how to do all of the film development steps if you've never done it before, because if you've never done it before, you kind of need to be shown the ropes and really make sure you know how to do it, because materials are really expensive. It's really, really easy to mess it up. And we want to make sure everyone can use it. And then if not, I will be able to develop film for people, because there's like multiple reels in each container, and I'll be developing a lot of film over the years. I might sell development services to people outside of Shell or people in general. But yeah, that will be an up and running kind of thing here in the future. Yes. No. Yeah, they're not like, they're totally probably not good to like eat or drink or like whatever, but I like they're not unsafe to like breathe, and like you're not really like wafting them around in big vats either. Like you just pour them from a closed container into your little the can looking thing, and then you're kind of just letting it sit and moving it, shaking it every few seconds, and then pouring it back into the closed container. And so the only thing is like it can stain your clothes. I've messed up my shoes before. Probably should wash your hands, but like yeah, I've totally like probably inhaled a bunch of it in my life, and as long as you're not drinking it, you should be fine. I'm pretty sure even if you drink some of them, you might be fine. Yes. You do technically put them down the drain. It's probably not good for the environment, but it's not like pouring paint thinner down the drain. You do reuse the chemicals multiple times before you pour it away. Some of them you don't, some of them you just throw away, but most of them you put in your container and then you put it back into the original vessel. That's another thing that's important that you like know from the workshop, because we don't want to just be pouring all of our chemicals down the drain. That would be really wasteful and expensive. So yeah, we're not super destroying the environment, but yeah, probably not the best thing, but not the worst.
How fast do you use the cycle throughout?
The entire process probably takes like 45 minutes because it's like 10 minutes per step plus some like rinsing steps in between. I'm gonna make like a big guide, but basically, yeah, I think it's really important to follow the temperatures and the agitation, which is like how much you shake stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah.
But for the bottle, I mean how many tries
Oh,
do you
that really depends on like how many rolls are used. I think that's something that we're gonna monitor by use. But I think each like round of chemicals, like you dilute, like you have a big concentration, you put a little bit in water, and that's what you use for like 10 to 20 rolls, and then you throw that out, and then you make another concentration, and you use that.
I have comment. I really like your presentation. It's really amazing.
Oh, thank you.
Which did you use?
I used Canva.
Oh,
Yeah, and Shaw has premium Canva, so it was like especially fancy. But yeah, it's pretty easy. I thought it was fun.
and also like I've seen this trend in photography, so something called 3D photography. Like you put your VR or AR gadget and you explore. Let's
Hmm.
see, you have a image of a ghost town and you put on the VR, and so it's really
Yeah,
pretty
yeah,
cool.
I've seen stuff like that. It's a lot easier to do in like digital photographs, just because like it like stitches them together. But that's actually what I'm working on right now, is like stitching film photos together digitally, for things like that. So it's really interesting to think about putting film in like VR or stuff like that. But yeah. But yeah, I'll keep you all posted when we get our materials, and then we can like start developing and stuff. It'll be really fun. Woo!
Make sure to stop the
Oh, cool.